Mick Jongeling is a design researcher, and Mick will share his research on adversarial design practices to negotiate a sustainable balance between the physical and digital world in the smart city.
Hi everybody, my name is Mick Jongeling. I'm a design researcher, and actually for the past 2 years I've worked at the Digital Society School on this topic. So I also worked in a track. So what I want to share with you is what an output of a track could be. And the output of my research project was how adversarial design practices in the faceless city can lead to new political change. So that's kind of what I want to share with you. And this fascination basically happened, I think, a year ago, I think March, when I saw this on the internet. And maybe for a lot of you, this is quite random, but this is somebody at the Hong Kong protest using a laser. And I thought that was fascinating because it almost looks like a night, but then in a city. So I started to research it a little bit more, and I will tell you a little bit later why this is so particularly fascinating. So a smart city is kind of like a utopia for a lot of people, where they consider that if we're all automated and we're all more efficient, we live more in harmonious ways, and we don't really have to deal anymore with the problems that exist in society, right? So this is an illustration, a very idealized thing where you can see people just being happy and interact, but you can also see self-driving cars, and you can actually see the cameras in the corners, which is a huge part of what the smart city would be. And smart cities are an ideal, like I said, and they're not necessarily so futuristic as this render, because this city is actually built 5 years ago, which is New Sangdo in South Korea. And it was supposed to be one of the smartest cities out there until Google started Waterfront in Toronto. And this city is now completely empty. And a lot of people are dealing with loneliness. And that is because the city itself is built to be like so welcoming that they start to forget about the culture. And that's something that we see with a lot of smart cities. And Marshall McLuhan said in 1962 already that as long as we become more interdependent on electronics, we will create a global village. And the village that he is saying, yeah, I see Theo react to McLuhan, the village is a very kind of contraceptive thing where he was talking about global village as a sort of being tribal, where everybody is back to its own roots, where they can send things. And at the same time, we're going back to the very natural core of where we are kind of primitive again. And this is the image of a smart city. And I would like to ask you, so you can just do it in the chat right now, where do you think this city is? There are some clues hidden, so you can probably see it. Mars, okay, yeah, almost. That's close. Japan, Spain, South Korea, China, because they're with an umbrella. Yep. Okay, so this is actually in Japan. And you can tell that by one of these automatic vehicles has actually Japanese on it. And this is the Toyota's Woven City, which they have claimed to want to build just outside of Tokyo. And it's a huge campus, and it's designed by Bjark, which is a Danish architect. And the idea is actually quite fascinating. There's roads just for vehicles, there's roads just for bikes, and there's roads just for pedestrians. And it's quite revolutionary. And at the same time, you can tell that this is in Japan. And even though it is in Japan, you almost don't see it anymore. So every aesthetic is blending with each other. And there's a question, like if Google was making cities in Toronto, if Huawei is making cities in China, if Amazon is interested in making campuses, if Cisco is making campuses, is Facebook making campuses for itself as well, and Toyota is making cities, we all have to start asking ourselves also a little bit like, what are these politicized agendas that these brands are trying to introduce, right? Because normally cities organize themselves quite naturally and they start to grow. But what happens when a company starts to get involved in that? And McLuhan said 15 years later that the global village is also a place of arduous interfaces and very abrasive situations. Now, we have to say that in that time, English was a little bit more defined than it is now. But what he's basically saying is that the global village is also something where a lot of conflicts happens and where the interaction between people can lead to troubling situations. And that's almost exactly what we're having now. So as an example, where I also started with is the Free Hong Kong, or the anti-extradition law addendum bill movement, or as I call them, the 5 demands protest started happening. There were some very interesting things to pick up on, because you could see for the first time how people started to resist actual smart city solutions. And I believe now there is some audio, but I don't think it will work. So I'm just going to mute this video and I will tell you exactly what is happening. So you see some protesters here, and there's a BBC report about they are gearing up for war. They are going to go to the front to fight with the actual police. And you can see them all padded up, unrecognizable. And the main thing that they are protecting is actually their identity. That is the most important thing in the protest, because with the surveillance cameras and all the systems, the identity and the repercussions that follow by being identified are more severe than actually getting hurt. So here's somebody saying that even your ears can be used as a way to identify you based on other photos that they attracted from social media. And that is quite bizarre, actually, that is the worst fear of somebody fighting for their rights, right? And the police are exactly doing the same. And this is quite a nice image to see, because you can tell that, like, remember that protester that I showed earlier? This police is also covering up their face, and they actually should have like a tag with their name on it and their badge number, and they don't have it. So they are also trying to be anonymous, and they are also trying to be unrecognizable for repercussions of anybody. And then you can actually see the cameraman behind him still filming, but like this whole interaction is actually quite weird, right? Because if you're thinking about the digital twin, both physical parties are very aware of that their digital self can have consequences. And that is something very interesting. And that is what Marshall McLuhan, at least in my eyes, said when he said arduous interfaces, because these interfaces are now at your body. So your face, your biometrics are now the interface for a digital twin to latch on. And that is actually what, to me, makes it quite interesting. So looking back at this again, what exactly is this protester doing? He's covering his face, and a lot of these things are actually for the physical harm that can be done, right? Tear gas. But he's also using this camera to block cameras. The laser is done to blind cameras, but also shoot down drones, because they've done that in Chile. So there's actually some really interesting kind of dynamic happening. Like, they're also fighting against CCTV and surveillance. And this biometrics is already been done in the 1880s or in early 1900s, where you could see Alphonse Bertillon, which was a French forensic detective, who started measuring people and started to predict, can we see from somebody's forehead if they are intelligent, if they are a criminal, if they are a pervert, or if they are just, you know, good for the wood market. So he started making these predictions, and he called that anthropometry, where he could measure people based on the sizes of their hands and could see if they have criminal tendencies. And that is kind of the root of what we see now as well. And that is actually quite strange, right? Because in that time, it was already very obvious that it didn't work. People who got identified wrongly, got accused wrongfully, got sent to jail. And memory is something that kind of lacks over time. It becomes hard to identify a memory or a person over time, as long as you don't really know them that well. So there's something that is very frantic about this. And China's identity system, the identity system, I have got the name real quick, but it's exactly that. It is completely focused on biometrics. And what it actually does is it uses camera feeds to trail back the profile that you have, and you get fined. So one of my favorite stories about this is actually there was a camera in front of a red light where there was a billboard behind it of a toothpaste commercial. And every time somebody crosses that red light, the system identified the model on the billboard, because that was the biggest face that it could find, so also the first, and it would find that model. So it was actually quite funny that all the people who were walking through red light never got a fine, but the model all of a sudden got like 500 fines. Like, where does these fines come from? But it actually came from this system. And I always like using the most cliche images when I try to find this sort of merge of digital to physical, because we explain it very bad. So there's always like this bald person who's blue or something, and there's also this thing. But here you can actually see like what happens when a digital twin is, right? Because they claim that a digital twin is an exact copy of who you are, but that's actually not true. So they're trying to say it's a mirror, but that's not the case. It's actually an interpretation of your behavior. So if you look at the taxonomy of what a digital twin would be, there's certain things that it can be. It can be a data link. So like I explained it on the right, by the way. So a data link, is it going from one thing to the other, or does it go both ways? What is its purpose? Is its purpose just to process? Is it to transfer, or is it just to hold data together? Like, for instance, the Apollo example from Ger was a perfect example of that. Is it about physical independence, or is it physically bound? Like, is it actually supposed to be with a person? Is it identical or partial, right? Like, what's the expression of this? The interface is M2M, does not market to market. It's machine to machine, or is there a human-machine interaction involved? And the synchronization, does it just synchronize one time and just simulate, or does it constantly synchronize with the first person? And the data input is where does it come from? And the time of creation is the most interesting part, right? So all these green things are what is mostly seen as the digital twin. But it's the time of creation that is really interesting here, because the physical part comes for a lot of digital twins comes first. And I like to believe in this sort of digital dualism from Nathan Jurgensen, where he says that the online and the offline world are two separate things. You cannot merge them. And it's kind of the same thing that early internet promised us to be anonymous and promised us to be everything that you wanted. I'm here now talking as myself, but I could have typed any name. And the idea was actually that you should be free and be whoever you want to be when it comes to your digital identity, right? But it's really weird, because it's all about if you can make a digital twin and it's based on you, then why does it come back to constantly look for the truth of who you are, right? Why does a digital twin need to know your passport? Why does it need to know how you look? Why does it need to know your service number? Like, it's really weird, actually. And Apple and Facebook are actually diving into this market where they're trying to find, like, what can they do to make the new passport? Can they remove the paper passport from society? And can they control identity? Which, you know, for a lot of people would be horrible to say, right? But they're actually trying it. And Amazon has tried out machines where they can measure your palm and scan it, because that's also identifiable. It's almost the most unique thing about you. And they said, we use that instead of your face to help you transaction. But we do that out of a comfort, and that's how it's sold to us. But we also can ask ourselves, like, wait, where does this data actually go? And what does Amazon want to do with this, right? And the police are doing the similar thing. So they're doing tests in the city, and they are doing that to keep people safe. And I'm saying that in quotation marks because I don't believe it. And this is a really good example where they were doing some shooting in the street, camera shooting, and somebody refused to show their face. And the police started pulling down scarves, pulling down shirts, saying like, no, you have to show your face to this camera. And then the moment somebody was like, well, I don't do it, I protest, and started getting violent, he got fined money. Even though I consider it a violation of your human rights if we walk into a street and we cannot agree to the terms and conditions. And this is also, obviously, there's no audio, but let me tell you real quick. So in this bus station in Madrid, every exit and every entrance would have cameras, which will use facial recognition to see a potential pickpocket. But there's also this thing about how many pickpockets are there on a day, right? And why do I have to give my privacy away in exchange to have this feeling of safety? And that is the exchange that we're doing now. And it's absolutely bizarre. And I don't know if you're still on Facebook. If you are, yeah, you're kind of being like this, where you just constantly give data to Facebook, constantly give data to them, and they are using that to predict your next move. And that is also a little bit of the ramifications of a digital twin. You don't know what it will do next. So there's a really nice infographic that I would like to show. So these are the things that you share online. And these can be, you know, like your name, your gender, your date of birth, maybe your PIN number, maybe your bank account number, maybe your favorite websites, you know, maybe you have a dog, I don't know, but they know. Because what they do is they're gonna start thinking about it. Okay, wait a minute, this person goes to this website, are they an athlete? Are they interested in food? Are they interested in fashion? What are they doing? And that's kind of how it goes. So they start making predictions. But what's happening now is that the digital starts talking back to the physical. And that is when it will start making assumptions and start saying, this is what you will do next. So it will know when you're vulnerable. So there's things where they can see when you broke up that you're probably more likely to be open up for dating apps, so they can make predictions based on this. And this is called surveillance capitalism, where they can use all the data to automate you into doing something that you're not even sure that you were doing. And that is a very interesting definition. It's quite old, but it's recently described in a book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which I would really say that you should read. And for us, everybody who's in Europe, we're actually very lucky because all these profiles that are made of it with GDPR, we can actually request the data set. So we can look into who our digital twin actually is and if it's accurate. So I don't know, from Bandersnatch, from Netflix, people asked, like, can you show me what the roadmap was of my experience? And you can actually see that. And that's also something that you can do as an EU citizen. You can request the data from any website and see what they think about you. So you can kind of meet your digital twin, but not really like this. I just love this image too much, but it's horrible, but it's kind of what it describes it to be. And as we are progressing, like the basis that we founded this whole technology on is still really biased, because what we now notice is that the data sets that are created to start with are from white men. So it's less accurate on, for instance, people of color. And one of these things that is happening because of that is like, let's buy more data sets from Facebook or Instagram or Amazon now even, so we can make these predictions more accurate. And maybe we shouldn't even try that at all, right? So there's this coded bias project, which I would really recommend checking out, where it's about, can AI actually recognize a person of color? And it turns out that it can't. And for a lot of us, I'm making an assumption here, but let me just say for me, the bias doesn't really affect me, right? Like I'm relatively safe here, but it is about the people who are not safe and the people who have huge consequences that this technology is actually 2% off. And that might be a problem. So where is it being done? Because a lot of people think about China, like let's try to think as dystopian as ever, but the municipality of Amsterdam is also doing that. And this is quite a fascinating project where they try to make a sort of digital fence for the Amsterdam arena to kick out football supporters who don't have a ticket. So it was for the European Championship. They feared that a lot of people who don't have a ticket would show up at the stadium, like sell drugs or sell tickets or buy illegal tickets or anything else. So they want to set up this fence that can kick you out without you even ever interfering with the fence, right? And they do that with your digital identity or your digital twin. And Donna Haraway, this is a quote that she says, but like what she mainly says in this one is, this is the gaze that mythically inscribes all marked bodies, that makes the unmarked category claim the power to see and not be seen, to represent while escaping representation. And this is called the God trick, where we don't even know anymore that a system is real, is there, but all that we know is that it exists and we have to fear it. And this was a really interesting thing, which started off a project almost 6 months ago now at the DSS, almost a year ago even, where the Bloomberg wrote, the regulation and legislation lag always behind technology. So I'm pretty sure you have dealt with a municipality before. They take their time, and they take 2 months, 6 months to finally pass a bill to ban facial recognition. But then there's always something else and there's something new. So actually legislation is not necessarily the answer anymore, right? We need to start looking at ourselves, because the money is coming in and the systems are getting sold. And Schiphol already has a system that you can check in with your face without you even knowing. By the time that you upload your passport online to buy a ticket, they also put that passport in their system so you can comfortably check in. And that is the prediction that's going to happen in a few years. Everything will be automated. And when we talk about faceless society, or actually post-corona society, does anybody still want to touch buttons anymore? So there's this sort of need for contactless interaction that they are capitalizing on, but how are they doing that? And that's when I come to adversarial design. And I am co-lead of the Speculative Futures Amsterdam chapter, and that is looking into new futures, new possibilities. And adversarial design is also looking at new possibilities, but there's a heavily agenda involved, and that is that you're trying to shape politics. So you have to be a little bit activist. And that is when it becomes super interesting for me, because there's that edge, right? There's this immediacy and this urgency. And it's basically made to just spark discussions, but then also have made sure that there will be actions taken. So, for instance, this project is CV Dazzle by Adam Harvey, which came out in 2010, which is still referred to today. And it's this hugely fetishized counter-surveillance project, right? Where they put makeup on a model, and it's perfect photography. It might not even be 100% accurate, but it's the way that they present it, which makes it believable. And for a lot of people, they gravitated towards this. And there's also the project Alias, which was, so they found out that Google Home and Amazon Echo were exchanging ultrasound signals to each other. So they could exchange data without we even hearing it. So they said, okay, if they are doing this, we can interfere with this sound, so to make sure that there's no exchange of data. And this is all just not, this is also about you, but it's also about them, right? The Google Home and the Amazon Echo can also change their sounds. And one of my favorite things, adversarial design doesn't have to be high tech. You don't have to know a lot about technology, but this is what's being done in Hong Kong now. The umbrella is one of the most essential weapons against surveillance, where they just hang up umbrellas in front of cameras, leave it, and then just go away, or they paint over them. It doesn't have to be super high tech. It can be as easy as possible, as long as it's disrupt the system. And there's this project done by Trevor Palin and Kate Crawford, which is offline now, which is a shame, because otherwise I would ask you all to try it. But it used ImageNet, a popular labeling system, where they would ask you to scan your face, and it would make a prediction about who they think you are. So you could be a newsreader or a microeconomist. And I remember me doing it, and I was something like a teacher, and then also I was a beard, and like there makes these assumptions, right? Am I a barber? Am I a car driver? Am I a superstar? Whatever. But if you are a person of color, you just got black person. There was nothing else. And what actually happened after this project came out, and it caused a lot of controversy, obviously, ImageNet deleted almost 500,000 images, but it's still going. They just said, thank you for the information, we're just going to change it. And that is also a little bit what adversarial design could be, right? Like, hey, this is a system, let's break it. Because this is what's happening now in India, which is quite bizarre. They do it to hunt people with corona. They use a phone with thermal goggles, so they could actually see temperature. And if we talk about embodiment, right, this is also almost a perfect example, because this is a real person, but actually he's a robot, right? Actually, he's just there to process data and walk around. This can be easily automated, but still it's done very relatively simple. And the coronavirus has also pushed this, it's almost like a gateway drug into a surveillance state. And there's this thing with Schneider's law, is like, anybody can design a security system or actually a surveillance system, which is so clever that you cannot break it anymore. And that is the issue that we're facing now, right? Like, are we able to say no to Facebook's predictions? Are we even aware that we're in a bubble? Are we even, can we even go out and not use your chip card anymore? Like, a chip card is also tracking you, right? And the chip card, you cannot live without it, because you will get a fine. So you have to exchange this data. And this became highly ironic when the Black Lives Matter protest happens, when there was a threat where they were afraid to protest because they could get fined and could found. And people started posting guidelines about how to protest safely, right? So you need to get the burner phone, and you need to make sure that you don't connect to Wi-Fi. Make sure your phone is empty. Don't bring an ID card. And all these things are adversarial design, right? How can we live as non-identifiable people? And there's a Mask On Zone website, which you can check any tips out that you need to do if you ever tend to go anonymously. But you can also just apply it immediately to your real life, because it's almost insane how many objects you have in your wallet that can identify you and can trace everybody back to you. And another thing what the coronavirus did, what was actually really funny, and this started out the project that I'm going to talk to you about, is face masks started to break facial recognition algorithms, because as people were covering up half of their face, the AI obviously was trained to recognize an entire face. So all of a sudden it was dealing with assumptions, and for digital twins who are dealing on that accuracy, it became all of a sudden very tedious. So, well, my students came to me and kind of talked to me about this, and it was like super interesting. So we decided to do something with it. And I just want to share you this quote, because I don't think anybody has ever said that. So like, yeah, like I don't want to wear a mask because I want to be identified by a surveillance system, right? Nobody ever says this. And what we figured out really quickly is already that there was a data set being made, which was trained on half faces. And how did they got that information? They got it from Instagram and they got it from Facebook. So everybody who uploaded a selfie with their mask on automatically was put into this data set, which then they used to identify you again. And it's quite bizarre, actually, to see how out of hand the digital twin can be when you need to know that everything that you do has a consequence. And a lot of us are aware of this, but that we don't really see anymore what the second order impact of it is, like what is happening after that and after that. So let me just explain how this actually goes. So your face has a point cloud, which are perfectly identifiable points on your face, which might be unique to you, but you know, in general, they are very accurate. And what a mask does, it kind of covers half that face. So the information is less. And what this team thought of was, let me put half a unique face on there so we can create a new face of point clouds, and that can actually disrupt the facial recognition system. And we tested it and it actually worked. So we were actually super happy, obviously, but it's not that far-fetched of an idea to do, right? So we used This Person Does Not Exist, which is a website, you might know it, which uses automated generated faces to make completely new faces, but these people don't exist. So they do not have a digital twin. They do not have a digital identity. There's nothing available data-wise on these people. But if you merge that with your face, you are also anonymous. And that's kind of how it looked, the prototype, and that's how we wanted it to be. We wanted it to be a way to still be human and still be able to show your face without actively rebelling against the system. So it's now still in beta, but you know, like shout out to Pranamita, Madeline, Robert, and Dan for making this project happen. Because for me, it was amazing to see that this was actually real and it could happen. And at the same time, it might give us a chance against this emerging industry. Because, you know, Amsterdam made this algorithm register. Don't know if you've seen it. Don't know if you're a fan of it, but I'm definitely not. Because the idea is not necessarily that Amsterdam is more transparent. It's great, but maybe we should have a vote in if these algorithms are even welcome. And the only reason that we have now is to break these algorithms, but we should be able to replicate them and mimic them. But there's a sort of monopoly on making these algorithms work in the city, and that's not how it should be done. So right now, the only thing that we have is resist them. And there's this quote from Shoshana Zuboff, which is from The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. So just to be clear, fully transparent, Robert read it all, and I didn't. I think I read maybe 2 pages, and this quote was on there. And now, thanks to Robert, I read maybe 10 pages because it's a really thick book. But I like this quote that she said, where she said, "There's no end of history, and each generation must assert its will and imaginations as new threats require us to retry the case in every age." And as you can see that almost 300 years ago, we were already fighting against a bias in recognizing faces. There was a sort of weirdness that we try to identify people based on how they look, and we're still going that same way, but now they have this weapon, which is the digital twin, to use it to hold against us. That is the ultimate problem that we're facing. So that's the end. I didn't want to go all dark, but I hope you liked it. I want to say that tomorrow we have a meetup of Speculative Futures Amsterdam, and you're welcome to join. And I think now, I don't know what's next, but I think we can go back to the main stage or something. So thank you.